the origins of this laptop scandal, which starts with Hunter Biden apparently taking his laptop for a simple repair on April 12th of 2019 to a local repair shop in Delaware, as absurd as that sounds, but
Yes.
That's the beginning, right?
Yep, that is.
And I mean, do we know anything about this repair shop or the owner of the repair shop?
So the owner of the repair shop has obviously, he's been in the media spotlight. He's come forward. The media has made much of the fact that he's a conservative, that he's a supporter of President Trump. And so they've tried to claim that this is some sort of setup. They've tried to claim that this is Russian disinformation. None of that makes any particular sense, because the crucial thing here is that the owner actually, through an intermediary, turned over the laptop to the FBI last year. So if
so I want to kind of walk through it step by step, because it is such a bizarre story and such an amazing story, and the other element of the story is the fact that nobody's covering the story, right? I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, this would be a ratings grabber. You would think that media channels would be all over this thing, and yet, of course, they're not. But so he drops it off. And then much has been noted about the fact that it was left for 45 days. So that would put us into late May of last year. And then I've got in my notes here that the owner called the FBI in September. So what is it about him leaving it for 45 days? What happened after 45 days? Because I don't have him calling the FBI until September.
So just backtrack a little bit. We don't know for sure that Hunter Biden dropped it off, but the laptop had the Beau Biden Foundation sticker. Now, Beau Biden is Hunter Biden's brother. He's deceased. Joe Biden has pretty much been running on that "I have a dead son" thing. Now, Hunter Biden running the Beau Biden Foundation, while at the same time having a romance with his brother's widow, which is a tad creepy, and this is actually going to come into play with the newest revelations coming from Giuliani. But anyway, so this laptop has a Beau Biden Foundation sticker on it. The owner is partially blind, so he's not able to confirm entirely who dropped it off. But at some point, it is a laptop repair shop. You're dropping off something. You're expected to be paid for it.
And sorry, there's a Hunter Biden signature on something? What is that?
So there does seem to be a Hunter Biden signature on it, but the owner said that he can't confirm who actually dropped it off.
Okay, but someone signed the name Hunter Biden on the receipt.
Yes. I mean, there is paperwork. There's a paper trail there.
Okay, so then what is it about this 45? What happened after 45 days?
So if you don't pick it up, the owner did a certain amount of work on it. If you don't pick it up, you don't actually pay your bill. The repair shop. I mean, that's pretty standard. You bring in your car, you never pick it up. You never pay your bill. At some point, the shop is just going to take possession of it and sell it.
Has there been an extensive on-camera interview with the owner?
There have been a number of interviews, mostly locally. They've kind of tried to barrage him with questions. And again, I mean, this guy's a repair shop owner. He's running a small hole-in-the-wall computer repair shop. He never expected to be at the center of all this. He's bewildered by all this media attention. He's partially disabled. So, I mean, beyond that, he's kind of overwhelmed by it. And this is the story.
Do you know the answer to this? Was he seeing, because obviously at some point something registered with him to contact the FBI. So I'm just curious, do we think that he was seeing some of these interesting materials through the course of him repairing it? Or it was after the 45 days when he said, oh, well, this guy's not picking it up, so I'm going to start noodling around in his computer?
So again, from his account, seemingly, the period elapsed. He actually then, I mean, when you're running a repair shop, you've got stuff there. You're going to figure out how to resell it used. So he takes a look at it. He browses through it. The normal response at that point is basically delete everything, clear the hard drive, resell it on eBay. But he comes across stuff that he finds troubling. He at some point through an intermediary contacts the FBI. Now, just to actually set the timeline, this happened in April. The laptop was dropped off in April. By the time the FBI is contacted, it's September. So we've had more than 40 days go by, but he doesn't entirely know what to do with it because this is not quite normative. And yet it does happen when you're dealing with the computer repair business. I've been long time ago. This is stuff I've encountered. Also, something people just have problematic materials there. The question is just how problematic is the material, and that's something we're finding out. It's something we're going to find out a bit more of today and as the story unfolds.
What in particular, if we know, did he see that caused him to think, I should call the FBI?
So we've seen some of the Hunter Biden photos that were printed in the New York Post. They obviously are somewhat problematic. They contain seeming depictions not just of bong hits, but we're talking more serious drug use. But this is not really the most exposed material. Allegedly, pictures of underage girls on the laptop. That would definitely trigger a response to we need to call the authorities. And this is again something.
Do we know? I mean, I've heard the assertion that there are pictures of underage girls, and I want to ask you about that. But so, is it just your belief that was probably the reason he contacted the FBI, or we know that for sure?
Well, he's just talked about troubling material, so we don't know for sure. But Giuliani mentioned the photos of underage girls. That seems to be the center of the issue. Again, the repairman hasn't clarified this. He said that it's disturbing.
And just to stay on that, because I was going to get to that in a minute anyway, on the underage girls, do we happen to know, are these like, is it like underage porn that we're talking about, or we're talking about pictures where Hunter would have been with the girls, or it was clear that he was the one taking the pictures as opposed to internet porn?
So we don't know. The pictures have not actually been released. New York Post obviously has not printed this for, again, very, very obvious reasons. They don't seem to have copies of it. Again, even handling material like that would be legally very problematic and exposes you to all sorts of legal risks. So we don't actually know, but there has been a text mentioning seemingly inappropriate online behavior with an underage girl by Hunter Biden. So that potentially leads us to conclude that it would be.
I mean, if there are incriminating pictures with or of underage girls on that laptop, imagine the stupidity of Hunter to hand this laptop to someone else. I mean, that's almost hard to fathom.
It's not that hard to fathom. I mean, we're just coming off the Jeffrey Toobin incident. We're coming off the Anthony Weiner case, which is really rather similar to this one in a number of ways. We get people behaving stupidly all the time. And again, I have done some computer repair back in the day, quite a while back. People will bring in computers with all sorts of wildly inappropriate material on them without thinking twice about it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so he contacts the FBI, and we're going to follow up on that in a second. But also around the same time, he contacts Rudy Giuliani's lawyer.
So we don't have an exact timeline on when he actually got in touch with Giuliani. This seems to have been later. There's an anonymous intermediary who dealt with the FBI beforehand. But Giuliani seemed to have gotten hold of it closer this year, seemingly, but we don't have a fixed timeline.
And I think you said this, we have confirmed, or the owner acknowledges when politically he's to the right, or he's a conservative, or he's a Trump supporter. I mean, he does acknowledge that. Yeah,
he's a conservative. But if you think about just in terms of the election, people have changed their minds. There had been a year for him to have changed his mind. So the setup, that was a pretty big gamble.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the idea this was a Russian setup seems like a real long shot, and I know that's you pointed that out very well in your piece. And we'll get to that also. So anyway, so the FBI gets it. Actually, I read something that indicated that perhaps he contacted the FBI in September, and then the FBI actually took possession of the laptop in December.
Yeah, so they made contact in September. The FBI issued a subpoena and actually took the laptop in December.
Okay, so how do we get from December, the FBI taking the laptop, Giuliani being contacted sometime around that same time, I think. Don't we think Giuliani was aware of it during that time too?
Again, we don't have an exact time on Giuliani. He's still kind of feeding our material and breadcrumbs.
Okay, so that's 10 months ago. Or 11 months ago. What's happened in those intervening 11 months, and how come this story has just come to light now?
So the FBI seemed to have just taken it and sat on it, which is all sorts of problematics. I mean, you have two possibilities here. One, there's actually no problematic material. The FBI reviews it and says, okay, sorry, we don't actually have anything to do with this. Here's your laptop back. Two, there's problematic material, and at this point, it does not take a year to deal with something like this. So obviously people are suspicious, they're concerned, they're wondering, why has the FBI been sitting on this for a year?
And do we know whether one of the things the FBI was looking into was not just the underage girls, but the international dealings that are referenced in some of the emails?
So that's a valid question, and the FBI has been quite mum on it. The only statement the FBI has issued on it in all this time is basically, we have nothing more than that. This is their latest statement. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but that's pretty much their response to Senator Johnson.
Okay, and what is it that caused it to come to light within the last week or so?
So Giuliani brought it forward. He brought it to the New York Post. The New York Post ran the story. The story immediately ran into social media censorship, and this is kind of where we are now.
Mm-hmm. So it's pretty much confirmed that Giuliani turned over the materials to the New York Post. Why do you think the New York Post, by the way?
That's an interesting question, but Giuliani is a New York guy. Obviously, he was the mayor of New York City. He had close ties to the New York Post. I was seemingly offered to Fox News, but Fox News was going back and forth on this. And there are very few other options. Nobody in the mainstream media even wants to report on it now. They certainly would not have wanted to run the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. I mean, one of my reaction, I know New York Post, some people consider a bit of a rag, but I mean, bottom line, New York Post doesn't put something on the front page without vetting it to some extent.
I mean, what they put out there is the contents of the laptop, so people can just kind of look at it themselves. There are pictures of Hunter Biden. There are texts and their emails. You can only vet that to some degree, but it's there. It is what it is.
You hear about the fact that supposedly Hunter Biden's lawyer has written a letter to I don't know whom requesting the laptop back. When was that? Tell us about that letter, and when was that sent?
So once the story actually went public, a letter was sent from the lawyer asking for the return of the laptop and all materials. The legal basis for this point is pretty recent, time passed, and the law is on the computer repair owner's side.
Hunter, a lawyer for Hunter Biden,
yes,
sent a letter to whom?
To the computer repair shop.
But it's now in the possession of the FBI.
So seemingly the laptop itself, the physical laptop, is in the possession of the FBI, but the contents of it were backed up. Otherwise, this entire process could not have even begun. So they backed the material before handing it over to the FBI. Otherwise, it's quite likely none of this would have ever seen the light of day. Because if you actually just go back a minute to the Hillary Clinton era, the FBI actually destroyed devices from the Clinton team after the interview. So that material was permanently lost. I suspect that would have happened here.
And having computer repair shop expertise, as you do, going back to the ownership issue, is there a kind of a standard agreement that you sign when you turn the thing in that you actually lose ownership of your laptop after a certain amount of time?
I don't know if it's standard, but seemingly under Delaware law, this is what happened. Now, the complicated part would be whether the contents of the drive also actually pass possession and would not run into copyright issues. I suspect legally that might be a thornier issue. I'm not familiar with Delaware law, but it's potentially Hunter Biden could pursue a copyright case, but that would require admitting that the pictures are his.
Mm-hmm. So I was just going to tick through what we think are the most notable things that have been found so far. And I helped prepare for this interview just by having cable news on this morning. And of course, flipping back and forth between Fox News and CNN, which hopefully we'll have time to get to that a bit. Just, the situation we've got with the media these days. I mean, I couldn't find anything on CNN about it. It's just not being reported whatsoever. I guess they used to report on it when it was this Russian disinformation campaign. You heard that reporting, but now you're not hearing any reporting on CNN, and yet it's the lead story every hour on Fox.
I mean, that kind of reflects the extent to which the media is partisan, to which the media has a pretty blatantly straightforward agenda. Fox is obviously pro-Trump. The rest of the media is obviously pro-Biden, and they're bearing the story to an unprecedented degree. Now, this is part of what happened in 2016. The Democrats blamed their defeat in part on the media's willingness to report on Hillary's emails. and on social media's willingness to tolerate those stories. So they've spent 4 years preparing for this, and their plan A is to bury any such material, immediately disavow it, and then hide it. So they've been doing that quite effectively. Twitter and Facebook have suppressed the reach of the New York Post story on Hunter Biden. They've amped up the media claims that it's a disinformation, that it's unverified, and the media has very quickly buried it. The only thing they will report on is that it is unverified and that it is a Russian disinformation operation.
Okay, so and then the question is, okay, is there really anything of import there? Is this really just about a son that we already know he's got a son who's had addiction issues and all kinds of other related problems and et cetera, or is this really reflect on the former vice president himself and candidate for president? So let's tick through what I've found to be the most significant stuff that everybody's reporting, and then maybe I'm missing some things that you're aware of. So there's the Burisma issue, where it appears from an email going back to, I think, 15 or 16. It looks pretty much confirmed that, in fact, in response to a request from his son, Biden met with or multiple Burisma officials while he was vice president, as a favor to the son who was serving on the board in response to the request from Burisma officials, despite the fact that Biden is on record probably multiple times being very clear, never met with them, never even discussed Burisma with my son. I don't talk business with my son.
That's a good summary. So it is pretty clear that Biden used his influence in that regard, that there were meetings, and you've got emails that are increasingly coming out from multiple sources now, boasting about the ability to get connections to the White House. None of this is really a surprise. It's just that Biden and Democrats and the media have denied it. We've seen this before. The entire Biden family has been finding ways to cash in, and they're finding ways to cash in now. But it gets closer to whether Biden specifically used his influence as vice president, because there's a big difference between just actually access and action. So we're going from access to action. The big catch is the action.
Yeah, but I mean, even just simply having the meeting that he had, absent acting inappropriately at the meeting, improperly at the meeting, I don't think there's anything illegal about Biden meeting with him, even understanding that his son is on the board. Really, the only issue that I see, and I'm curious your thoughts, is the fact that Biden denied it. So he's on record lying about it.
So there are a lot of things you can do as a politician that are legal but are still blatantly corrupt. Part of this is really a public perception issue. Nobody seriously expects that Biden is going to Biden Sr. is going to face legal issues in this regard. It's quite unlikely, but it shows that he did abuse his power. That he, in some ways, this is not really a new development. This is not really a new development. Sorry about that. Joe Biden and the entire Biden family have found various ways to benefit. Biden's brother, Biden's daughter, various extended members of his family have very much found ways to benefit from that access. And it's not necessarily illegal. A lot of the things that people in DC do that are blatantly corrupt are not illegal. Yeah. The denial, as you mentioned, is obviously a serious problem because he's on the campaign trail and he's lying about it. But he's also been caught lying about other things on the campaign trail. He's insisted flat out he's not actually going to ban fracking, after insisting earlier flat out that he's going to wipe out fracking.
What about sticking on the issue of legality? And I don't know if you would know the answer to this or not, but everybody can understand conflicts of interest. And I know there's got to be lots of rules and laws regarding conflicts of interest. The fact that Biden was working on the issue of this Ukrainian prosecutor, right, and proudly announced that he managed to get the guy fired, I believe is what happened, or the guy resigned. That's a clear conflict because the guy's investigating Burisma, his son is on the board, and Biden is working on behalf of the U.S. government, regardless of the fact that apparently there was other governments that also wanted this guy removed. Bottom line, that's an obvious conflict, and that could be illegal, I would think. I mean, it's such an obvious conflict. There must be conflict of interest laws that would require a politician to step away from that situation.
So conflict of interest is an ethical issue, and DC is not that big on ethics. The legal question really would hinge on the question of coordination. Are there emails, are there texts, are there messages being exchanged between Biden, between his chief of staff, between Hunter Biden, between members of Hunter Biden's entourage, which actually arrange things? If they're that stupid, then they can actually have walked into territory that would land them in prison. But it takes a lot of effort to prove something like that. Really, the question is, we're in the final stretch of an election. The question is, can President Trump, can his associates make the case that Biden is corrupt using this new information?
Mm-hmm. Well, and why was he lying about it? Now, he may continue to deny that the meeting took place. All you've got is an email where the guy's thanking Hunter for putting together the meeting. That seems pretty, pretty good evidence. But then again, it's not firsthand evidence necessarily. So Biden can still deny it. I don't care what the guy wrote. I didn't meet with him.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll take that approach. It's a question of what people are going to believe. The more the story continues, the more materials are coming out, and Giuliani team is clearly intent on feeding things out step by step, the drip scandal process. The more this actually consumes airtime, the more the public actually develops suspicions about Biden. That's really the money shot.
So then the next email you keep hearing about is from 2017, which of course is important because that means Biden's no longer in office. And it's Hunter trying to put together a deal with a large Chinese corporation. I think it's large. You could correct me on that. But bottom line, as a part of this deal, it looks like Joe Biden would get 10% equity in this new entity that they're creating. Is that really that problematic? Why should people be so bothered by that email with Joe Biden no longer in office, possibly having an equity stake in a new business?
Assuming that it is referring to actually Joe Biden, which is an argument, which is a subject of debate, it is a huge problem because, first of all, every Chinese business, particularly this one, has ties to the Communist Party. You don't do business in China without going through the Communist Party. The only reason for doing this kind of business with Joe Biden would be because they expect him to become the president of the United States. They expect him to continue holding a position. I mean, this is the same thing we had with the Clintons back in the day in the Clinton Foundation. The amount of money being donated to the Clinton Foundation completely went off the cliff once Hillary Clinton lost the election. It was clear she was no longer going to be in any kind of leadership position within the government. Meanwhile, a ton of money was pouring into the Clinton Foundation before 2016. So people are actually getting on board with politicians for a very particular reason, because they expect these people to actually be able to do favors for them. Now, a foreign country, frankly, one that is an enemy of the United States, and personnel who are members of the Communist Party or members of the communist elite, if they actually were giving Joe Biden a share in the state-owned company, that would be hugely explosive.
Mm-hmm. Do you think in 2017 that Biden was thinking that he was going to run for president? I kind of wonder whether he was thinking about that at that time or not. And maybe if he was truly thinking of it, well, maybe my theory is correct that he wasn't really thinking about it, and hence those kind of deals were okay, and now they're not okay now that it turns out he's running for president.
Well, Biden very much wanted to run in 2016. The problem was Hillary Clinton. And we had the surreal spectacle of actually Obama doing an event with Biden in the Rose Garden where Joe Biden announced that he was not going to run. It was a very, very surreal scene, and it was very clearly an attempt by Obama to calm Biden down and reassure him. The moment Hillary lost, Biden very much wanted to be back in there again. His people began building up the infrastructure, because there's a reason that Biden actually won and burst through the Democrat primaries. He did begin building the machine fairly early. You had a bunch of these candidates who actually waited way too long. Some waited ridiculously long amount of times. I had people jumping in the middle of the primaries. Biden's people had been planning this for a while. He's got a team of people who are loyal to him. He reinforced them with some of Hillary's people, and he became the favorite candidate. Now, the favorite candidate doesn't always win. I mean, we can look back at Jeb Bush, who was the favorite candidate who had the machine, and he very much lost. Hillary Clinton, however, pulled it through in 2016, and Biden very predictably pulled it through in 2020 again.
What did you make of Obama being so slow to endorse Biden?
It's pretty clear about that. Obama has spoken about it. confidentially. He doesn't think that Biden can go all the way. He doesn't think that Biden is actually good in the campaign trail. And he obviously has a point. If we weren't in the middle of a pandemic lockdown, if the economy hadn't cratered, if we hadn't had massive race riots, Biden would not remotely be a contender.
So back to that email, I don't think, assuming the 10% is intended, I think they call him the big guy, and everybody's assuming that's Joe Biden. But he's not CC'd on the email. So frankly, we don't really even know whether Biden was even aware that his son was cooking up this deal, A. B, whether the deal actually happened or not.
Yeah, so these are still question marks. These are big question marks. It's doubtful that Biden himself would have been CC'd on the email. People like his chief of staff, some of those who are close to him, who actually are key members of his potential transition team, would be potentially involved in something like that. If the investigation actually takes off, then they start looking at their emails. But Joe Biden isn't the guy who's going to be emailing details of deals back and forth. But if you actually have enough grounds for an investigation, you can actually start looking into these things.
Mm-hmm. What did you make of the email, which was a little confusing to me? I think it was from Hunter Biden to his daughter, but said something about giving half your salary to Pop or something. Did that involve Joe Biden at all? Or you know the email I'm talking about?
I know the email. Again, it's kind of because they're not actually coming out and saying things. It's hard to know, but people are speculating that it does actually refer to Joe Biden because seemingly who else could it refer to? But again, just like mentioning the big guy, it's you're guessing to some degree.
Mm-hmm. But it would seem to indicate that Hunter has been sharing fees with his dad.
That's strongly suggestive of that, which would not be surprising, and that actually would be illegal.
Yeah. Then I think we got something illegal because presumably assuming it was taking place while he was VP.
Even if he was out of office and it was unreported, that would still be wire fraud. It would be a whole bunch of things.
Then I think this one just came out today, a picture, or maybe it was yesterday, a picture between Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and some Kazakhstani official or oligarch. Tell us about that picture.
So again, you've got the Biden family doing business in some of these shady areas, and Hunter Biden very clearly trading on Joe Biden to get there. And again, you've got an actual picture now that's undeniable of Joe Biden meeting with Hunter Biden's business partners in this case, Kazakh oligarchs. Again, very corrupt country. Used to be within the former Soviet sphere, and it's a place you want to go do business if you're doing something shady.
It's just so ridiculous, this comment of Biden. I don't talk business with my son. I mean, if that was true, you're an idiot because he is your son, you're vice president of the United States, and you ought to be concerned about what business your son is up to.
Yeah, I mean, this was all very well known. Biden's denial is completely implausible. Hunter Biden, Kerry's son, were doing major deals around the world while their fathers held cabinet positions, and in Hunter Biden's case was the vice president of the United States. It's obviously ridiculous to think that these kids who were utterly incompetent, who produced absolutely nothing, were getting these ridiculous salaries and these ridiculous business opportunities because they were so talented on their own. The only reason they were getting their foot in the door in China and Kazakhstan and any part of the former Soviet Union and the former Warsaw Pact areas was because this is how business is done over there. And unfortunately, it's how business is done here. They've got oligarchies, we've got oligarchies.
Yeah, and part of me wonders whether this will become a bigger story after the election, and that even Democrats may embrace the story, depending on which direction it goes. But ultimately, could be a way for Kamala Harris to become our next president.
Well, we're already looking at unprecedented corruption if Joe Biden wins. I mean, for example, you've got his son-in-law, Ron Klein, who was at the same time advising Biden on the coronavirus response and at the same time making private equity investments in coronavirus companies. But this is just how the Biden family does business. Biden's brother got multi-billion-dollar contracts to build houses in Iraq. What was his experience building houses? None, zero. This is just how the Biden family does things. And put Joe Biden at the top, every single member of the Biden family, no matter how distantly related, is going to come in and is going to grab their own share.
And How uncommon do you think this is? Because this sounds like kind of standard Washington type corruption that exists. I mean, we think roughly 20% of senators and congressmen and administration officials have family members doing these kind of deals?
It's widespread, but there are kind of different levels of corruption. There are people who are actually clean and they're a minority. There are people who do favors, and there are people who are just completely out of control. And when it comes to this kind of thing, the out of control category, the Clintons were in that category. They could absolutely not pass up a single dime. Harry Reid was in that category, former Senate Democrat Majority Leader, and Biden family is very much in that category. These are people who absolutely will go for any opportunity, no matter how shady.
Okay. Well, before I was going to then get back to some of the Hunter related materials, because even though they're kind of salacious, still think they're relevant. But before I do that, am I missing any other important pieces of information that have been found that directly relate to Joe Biden?
So stuff is still coming out. I think we're going to know a lot more tonight than we know right now. But I think that's a pretty good summary.
So, all right. So back to Hunter then. There's an email about a crack pipe and a 14-year-old. And it seemed to me that it's his wife or ex-wife making this allegation. And it almost seemed to me that, he's pointing this out. I think it was in an email to his father, Joe, but that his wife was maybe just kind of blackmailing with this or bringing it to the attention of some marriage counselor or something.
So it seems like this was his brother's wife, or rather his brother's widow. So as mentioned earlier, he was running the Beau Biden Foundation. Beau Biden was his brother. Beau Biden died. For a while, Hunter Biden was romancing the widow. And whether you see it as creepy or moving, just kind of is subjective. But this discussion puts a whole other spin on it. So seemingly, he was behaving inappropriately with an underage girl. Some people have speculated that this would actually be his niece.
And it was Beau Biden's widow who was making this allegation.
Seemingly.
Mm-hmm.
And blacked out, so we're kind of speculating.
And how does crack pipe fit into all this?
So one of the photos that the New York Post published that's made its rounds is seemingly Hunter Biden with a crack pipe. So this would seem to be a reference to problematic behavior by him. We know he had a serious drug problem. It seems to have been even more serious than we thought. And it seems to, according to this, have led to inappropriate behavior with an underage girl.
Uh-huh. And what is his current marital status?
He's been sued for child support by a stripper in Arkansas who had his baby, allegedly. But I think that's as close to marriage as he's gotten.
But he has a grown daughter?
Yes.
And that's that was also out of wedlock then, I guess?
That's a previous marriage.
Oh, previous marriage. Okay. So he has been married before, had one kid. Then he has a fling with Beau's widow. But that they're no longer together.
They're not. Seemingly this casts light on why they might not have been together.
Mm-hmm. And I guess he lives in Delaware, hence why it was dropped off in Delaware?
Oh, the Biden family is based out of Delaware. It seems like Hunter Biden has had places in different parts of the country. But at that point, it seems like he would have been in Delaware. Certainly the Beau Biden Foundation is registered in Delaware.
Okay, let's get to a little bit of a couple of things you're covering in the article. Well, your article, it seemed to me, was a lot about the allegation that this is Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation, and you do a great job of discrediting that. At this point, I'm not sure we need to talk too much more about that because no one seems to be asserting that anymore. But I don't know if you want to put a kind of dot the I and cross the T on that one.
So Representative Adam Schiff did insist that it was Russian disinformation. We had a letter from 15 national security professionals, most of whom were Obama administration veterans, claiming that it had the earmarks of Russian disinformation, which is not the same thing as saying that it is Russian disinformation. Anyway, the Director of National Intelligence, Ratcliffe, came forward to say that they were not investigating this as Russian disinformation. The media was claiming that they had a congressional source who was telling them the FBI was investigating it. The FBI has denied that they're investigating it as Russian disinformation. So the story isn't going anywhere, but at the same time, the media will kind of keep up the Russian disinformation thing anyway.
The Twitter blocked this story from the New York Post, and am I correct that they also blocked the entire account of the New York Post? New York Post couldn't post anything on Twitter?
So both Facebook and Twitter took measures. Facebook throttled the reach of the story. Twitter went very aggressive. They actually suspended accounts. They blocked people from tweeting, including the New York Post. For that matter, they hit a lot of high profile people, including administration people. So they've been very aggressive in trying to censor the story, and they can't actually explain why they're censoring the story. They've gone from one excuse to another excuse. But yes, the New York Post, which is a major newspaper, is locked out of its Twitter account because it refuses to delete links to the story.
So as we speak, that's the current state, that the New York Post is locked out of its Twitter account.
Last time I checked.
So, and has Twitter come forward yet with an explanation as to why?
They've had 4 or 5 explanations. Their final explanation was that it's in violation of their hack materials policy. The problem is that they have hack materials being deployed, especially by the media, all the time. The media has had no problems with using hack materials. They've done it on a regular basis. And now suddenly Twitter decided that it's inappropriate. This is a very last-minute decision. And apparently the only time it's inappropriate is when Joe Biden is affected by it.
Mm-hmm. What about Google/YouTube? Have they, as far as we know, I mean, sometimes what they do is very hidden, so you don't know what they're doing. But do we know if they're doing any throttling?
So Google and YouTube, Google hasn't made an official announcement in the same way. They tend to, like Facebook, throttle, limit access, shadow ban. People use different terms for it. They do it more inconspicuously. And really, Twitter's more overt attack gave the story legs. It gave it more publicity, whereas Facebook's more covert approach was far more effective in limiting the reach of the story.
Mm-hmm. So do you follow much? In fact, I think it just came up. They're already, I forget who was suggesting an amendment to this law, but it's this law that gives some indemnity to the social media companies for, I assume, defamation. So it protects them against defamation claims merely because somebody posts something on their site, which, first of all, am I right about that?
So there was something during the Clinton administration that was passed called the Communications Decency Act, or CDA. This was an attempt to actually remove pornography and indecent material from the internet. Obviously, it never actually really functioned as far as the law went. It was struck down pretty quickly. But Section 230 of this, and we're talking really huge bills, the Section 230 of it was kept alive, and Section 230 was snuck in by special interests, which is what they do. There's a bill, there's a big bill. It's thousands of pages. You don't actually look through it. And somewhere in there is something that's buried that is going to have a huge impact for a particular industry. That's the case with Section 230, which basically said that just because a major platform will run it, it doesn't actually mean anything. They have protection in this regard, as long as they're not the ones actually publishing it themselves. And all these things are kind of subject to some debate. So a lot of the opposition to these big, really huge, big tech monopolies has focused on removing Section 230 protections, especially as these so-called platforms start making editorial decisions and really function more like media outlets rather than just providing a platform for people to use.
Good. Thanks for that explanation. So yeah, let's talk about that just a bit. In my personal view, I love 230. I think that they should have protection against claims for defamation, because I think they should just be platforms. Things go up there. If somebody posts something that's defamatory, you can go after the person who posted and said the defamatory thing, and that allows the ultimate freedom of speech. However, if they're going to start selectively editing, as you state, then that does change the game. But I guess it's why Facebook, they should not be editing. They should be enjoying the privileges of this Section 230 exemption that allows them to have anything be up there and not face liability. And that made it nice and easy for them. Sit back, let people put stuff up there, and don't worry about censoring or editing it. But they're really stepping into it now by doing that. And that probably should be an exception to 230. You said, you have indemnity unless you start editing, and then you lose the indemnity.
So part of it is that the internet in 1998 or even 2008 looked very different than it does now. You had a whole large variety of companies, and you had a lot of free speech, and you had this kind of healthy, vigorous climate. There were multiple search engines and multiple sites and multiple forums. Increasingly, everything is solidified around about a dozen companies, some whose names you know, like Amazon, Facebook, Google, and some whose names you don't necessarily know. But these companies essentially control the internet. They control access to it. They control what you see. Google, for example, controls about 88% of search traffic in the United States. Facebook controls about 80% of social media. These are effectively functionally monopolies. So the game changed very much. These provisions were meant to really protect a kind of open internet, but the internet is not open anymore. It's very much closed. It's very much under control of a small number of companies who are gatekeepers. We can cut people off. Now, in 2016, as I mentioned before, the media and the Democrats largely blamed their loss on the freedom for people to just discuss things on Facebook. And they've been pressuring very hard for there to be censorship. So basically, you have both Republicans and Democrats pressuring companies like Facebook. Democrats want more censorship. Republicans want less censorship. Mark Zuckerberg is kind of playing both sides. He's trying to give both sides what they want, which of course is impossible, because if you have one group of people saying, we need you to censor more, and we have another group of people saying, we need you to censor less, how do you split that difference?
Yeah. And, if this 230 does get amended to take away indemnity, I don't like that, because it's just going to cause these companies to edit even more, because they're going to have additional reason now that, hey, we've got fear of liability. So we got to be very cautious, and they're going to have tons of editors. And we know that most of those editors are going to lean left. So 90% of the stuff edited out is going to be material that's, conservative.
Yeah. That's correct. I completely agree with that. Some conservatives have embraced the whole Section 230 position. I think it's dangerous for the reason you mentioned, and also because if you actually start having a fairness doctrine for the internet with some sort of government body regulating it, that's going to push it obviously much, much further to the left. Again, I think what's really needed is to turn back the clock on the internet, at least to some degree, break up some of these big monopolies that just have way too much power. Because if you have a company that controls 80% of what people see, then everybody's going to be trying to use it for political gain. If you have companies that have 10, 12, 18%, they're not targets in the same way. It's a more democratized, it's a more open internet. If you have this kind of consolidation of power, everybody's going to want to control it.
Yeah, well, we saw the first case on that, right? Google got sued yesterday for antitrust violations, essentially because of what you just stated, right? That because they've got 88% of the searches?
Yeah, that is, this has been a long time coming. It should have happened quite a while back. The scale of Google as a monopoly is incredible. You have multiple state attorney generals. You have the Justice Department all suing Google. And this is really something that should have happened back in the Clinton administration when Google became this kind of monopoly. It's been sitting for too long with no action taken. And this is really important because the internet really flows through two means. People find things through either search or through social media. This is how people, among other things, get their news. So people are either using Google or using Facebook to find out what's going on. Take down both of those monopolies, break them up into smaller companies, and we have a more open internet. We have one that's less explosive, less violent, less about power grabs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's weird. On the one hand, the internet, it's hard to think that a monopoly could even exist in the days of the internet now, because we do have at our fingertips access to so much, right? So that kind of argues against there being monopoly. But if your access to things starts by going searching for things, and all those searches are going through Google, then I guess that's a problem.
When people actually are out to find out something, what do they do? Well, let me Google it. That kind of says it all. And people will cite what they call alternative search engines like DuckDuckGo, but those are just you really using the Google index. They're just scraping Google for the most part. So you're just getting Google's results, but with an anonymous overlay, which is good for privacy, but doesn't solve the fundamental problem. There are really only two major search engines, Google and Bing. Both of those are owned by big tech companies, and Bing has a fraction of the market share. So it's not healthy for a country when the marketplace of ideas is controlled by a handful of companies.
How do you evaluate Amazon on that scale?
Amazon effectively is eating up retail. It's eating up retail on a massive level. And what it's really doing, because increasingly what you see on Amazon is third-party sellers. So Majority of actual products on Amazon are going through third-party sellers. A majority of Amazon third-party sellers are China-based sellers. So really what Amazon has become is a fulfillment platform for Chinese sellers moving products to the United States. Many of these products are counterfeit. There's very little action from Amazon about that. I mean, we all shopped at Amazon. We've all gotten products that don't look right. Counterfeiting is a huge issue. That's one of the things that Congress has held hearings about, but it needs major action because at this point, American retail is being wiped out, and what's replacing it is basically a front page for Alibaba.
Yeah, well, it's that, and it's also Amazon making products itself now. So it sees all the data. It knows what's making money and what's not. So it goes into those, it knocks off products that are doing well on its site and puts them under the Amazon brand, probably makes them in China.
Yes,
so
of course.
That's pretty anti-competitive.
Yes.
And then the last thing I say about Amazon is the banning of books. Talk about censorship. I mean, I'm aware of a few books that have been banned from Amazon, and it's absolutely for absurd reasons, that they're politically correct reasons.
And when you actually buy an ebook from Amazon, you put it on your Kindle, and this is an incredible form of censorship. Amazon can decide to retroactively remove the book from your Kindle, which means you don't actually own the books you buy.
Yeah. All right. Well, I probably need to let you go, but there was a quote I do have to ask you about that was in your article about this Hunter Biden thing, and I never read this quote, and I want you to give it some context for me. This quote from Putin about the Democratic Party. This is a real quote. Do you know what I'm talking? I'm going to read it, but you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so it says the Democratic Party in America is traditionally closer to the so-called liberal values, closer to social democratic ideas, and it was from the social democratic environment that the Communist Party evolved. This can be seen as an ideological basis for developing contacts with the Democratic representative. So what was the context in which he made these comments, and what do you make of it?
So he was doing an interview with a domestic outlet, and domestic outlets in Russia are straight up regime propaganda. And it's pretty clear that, contrary to what the media in this country is saying, Putin is actually seemingly preparing for a Biden victory and preparing to make some sort of arrangement with Biden. Notably, actually, when it came to the START treaty, the Trump administration was holding out for a one-year extension with an end to Russian nuclear development. Well, Biden was prepared to give them a 5-year extension with no preconditions whatsoever. So as far as the Russians are concerned, Biden would be a pretty good deal.
Thank you again to Daniel Greenfield for his great reporting on this. You can go to his personal website. You can also go to Front Page to see his work. Also, if you're watching the debate tonight, we hope that this gives you good background information to see if this is addressed in the debate. Hopefully the moderator is going to be bringing this issue up, and now you've got great background information to assess what the candidates have to say about this. Thank you to our producer, Michael Parker. Thank you to our intern, Jake Wall. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.